The Great Gatsby is a cunty movie. I said it. The movie is cunty. Baz Luhrmann's absolutely over-the-top, lascivious and lurid, copiously colorful, daring and dazzling spectacle adaptation of this great American novel, with every bit of its mixed reception by critics, is cunty as hell. As cunty as Brat. Not even the regular Brat. The damn deluxe. Is it an accurate portrayal of 1922? Well, that depends on how you judge it. If you want to critique the film on a strict basis as a historically accurate period piece, you can. But I don't think it is a period piece in the way that we tend to understand it. Through the course of this video, my goal is to convince you that this version of The Great Gatsby serves the purpose of conveying the emotional intensity of the Jazz Age to the eyes of the 2010s. And that it's pretty damn cunty. Baz Luhrmann is an Australian film producer and director known for his often maximalist style. In 2001, he was lauded for the historical drama Moulin Rouge, which explored, well, the Moulin Rouge during Belle Epoque Paris. All color and music, sound and motion, said reviewer Roger Ebert. It is widely considered not only Baz Luhrmann's greatest, but one of the greatest of all time. How natural was it then that after directing one of the most celebrated historical dramas of cinema, that Baz Luhrmann should go on to adapt the great American novel, The Great Gatsby. The 1920s were a time of excess, a time of color, music, sound, and motion, aligning perfectly with Luhrmann's signature style. And it ended up quite a grand film, with a budget approaching $200 million, a star-studded cast including Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire, and graphics card guzzling special effects to rival even the blockbuster of superhero flicks. Upon its release in 2013, it was an audience smash, understandably. The film grossed $353 million and remains Baz Luhrmann's highest grossing film to date. A piece of IP with this much cultural capital, adapted with this much pomp and circumstance, was destined to print money. That doesn't surprise anyone. However, critics were divided. The Tomato Meter, a score of aggregate critic reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, places approval ratings at 48% and gives it the green splatter. The critic consensus reads, while certainly ambitious and every bit as visually dazzling as one might expect, Baz Luhrmann's The Great Gatsby emphasizes visual splendor at the expense of its source material's vibrant heart. The source material? Are we trying to adapt a novel to film? A loaded book, whose audiobook clocks in at just under 5 hours, requires some abridgment to fit into a format of 2 hours? Gasp. It's a fundamental limit of the medium. Every adaptation of every book has been chastised for not capturing the full scope of the text. It's pretty much inevitable, but I'm going to argue that Baz Luhrmann's The Great Gatsby completely and totally works. I have read the book. I like it a lot. Fitzgerald's insistence on using a zippy dialogue tag every time someone speaks distracts me a lot, admitted. But as someone who has been in love with the 1920s all my life, for no identifiable reason, I still found it greatly enjoyable. Baz Luhrmann's film, however, trades over-the-top dialogue tags with over-the-top production values. 2013's Gatsby is a camp film. That's what it is. I'm going to stand on business. Is it clocking to you? It's also really cunty. I'm gonna get into why it works. Starting off though, we need to lay a historical foundation. Let's get to it. I personally find it a bit humorous that a couple pieces of Jazz Age pastiche, this film, Thoroughly Modern Millie, are set in 1922, because 1922 wasn't the most 1920s year. It was a baby 1920s time. A mixed bag. Many of the cultural staples we associate with the 1920s were very much not a thing yet, or were nascent. Skirts were shorter than, say, in 1917, but they wouldn't be what we think of as 1920s short until a very sudden hem elevation around 1925. The economy was expanding, but was actually coming out of a small recession that took place between 1920 and 1921. In 1922, only roughly 14% of Americans owned a car, over half by 1929. Art Deco was still in flux with the preceding Art Nouveau. The concept of the flapper had been cemented in the 1920 film The Flapper, featuring Olive Thomas as the titular character, but for heaven's sake, the Charleston wouldn't be written for one more year. 1928 might be convincingly modern-ish, if portrayed right. The reality of 1922, however, is likely to appear quaint to people. no matter how you slice it. At least to us, in the modern day. Conversely, if you had shown someone from 1900 what popular culture in 1922 was like, however, they may have just blown a gasket. The turn of the century was remembered as quite an innocent time. Now, if you know anything about my content, you know that I think things have always objectively sucked in a lot of ways. We often face the same evil, no such thing as an innocent time, yada, yada, yada. However, at least as far as what was out there in the open, many fashions, media, and social conventions of the Western world around the turn of the century were certainly from a different time. Skirts that scrape the floor, traditional courtship rituals, the Gibson girl, among other things. Queen Victoria was still alive over in the UK in 1900, and there's a reason we lump all 70 years of her reign under the Victorian label. The conservative culture, which came to define her reign, and in a broader sense, the stuffy way in which we now imagine the 19th century, were in fact relatively locked in that whole time. But then came war. The Great War. The war to end all wars. Supposedly. This was the end of a long era of innocence, as far as many were concerned, although there had been scuffles in the decades previous. World War I upset the balance by allowing women to work independently, increasing industrialization and urbanization, and setting into place the cascade of factors that would precede the 1920s. There's a popular song from 1919 that asks, how are you going to keep them down at the farm now that they've seen Paris? And that was the thing. People had seen more, and there's no going back from that. The floodgates were open for urbanization, which opened the floodgates for materialism and consumerism, speculation on the stock market, looser fashions, jazz music. And although prohibition had made alcohol illegal starting in 1920, it backfired, and drinking culture became underground and even more debaucherous. It's difficult now to look at pictures from 1922 and imagine that that was the most exhilarating, modern, and exciting period to be alive to date in American history. In black and white, in long skirts, looking back, we can't feel that excitement. F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel aims to capture that context, to tell a story of the shallow rich, class tensions, and age-old tropes of love and loss set on a sparkling new stage. And Baz Luhrmann's film does the same thing, but adapted for the modern eyes of the Tumblr generation. The costumes are the elephant in the room, so I'm going to have to even defend those, despite being a fashion history nerd who knows that they're definitely wrong, in a sense. Let's get into that. I admit, I do find it odd when people take a really face value approach to critiquing the costumes in this film, as if it's supposed to be Downton Abbey or something, when it's a camp film. Or when people suggest that the costume team for this movie must not know what they're doing. On a $200 million film, every detail will be thought of. That's what you're paying people to do. Catherine Martin was hired as the film's costume designer. She had worked previously with Baz on Moulin Rouge and several other of his films as well. And why would we assume that someone who has worked on an impressive array of period pieces, who does costume and set design for a living, doesn't understand fashion history? Of course she does, but they had a unique vision. She and Baz went to libraries at the MMA and at FIT with, she says, detective-like diligence, pillaging archives of Miu Miu and Prada for inspiration. And she got to work designing a heightened version of the 1920s based on mostly runway concepts and fashion illustrations of the whole decade, deciding that for a modern audience, the later 1920s, with its slightly slimmer silhouettes and shorter skirts, made a version of the 1920s that would fit better with audience expectations of the jazz age. Catherine Martin later told Collectors Weekly that if you look at the fashion illustrations as opposed to what actually ended up being made, quote, you will see that the 20s were all about sex, as it was the first time that women basically wore no undergarments, not even a garter belt. While to us, the shapeless, flat-chested look of the early 1920s may seem sexless, at the time it was incredibly sexy, as the body was seen as being freed from the cages, corsets, and padding that had defined previous eras. So, to make the spirit match, and update it for modern eyes, Catherine did design some much bustier fashions. And yes, they're over the top. There's ruffle vomit. Some outfits look better suited for a Tumblr gif than a 1922 issue of Vogue, and yet it fits. This film was gift on Tumblr. A few of these costumes even are quite accurate. Again, such as this robe de style Daisy wears. Catherine Martin worked directly with Brooks Brothers, Prada, and Tiffany & Co. to create the menagerie of costumes we see throughout the film, from Gatsby's touchy pink suit to the many partygoer outfits we see during Gatsby's grand fiestas. At the 86th Academy Awards, Catherine Martin won an Oscar for Best Costume Design for her work on The Great Gatsby, and I believe it's very deserved. I strongly posit that these choices are a great fit when we consider the other choices made in the film, and how they all come together to create a camp spectacle. Another creative choice which drew ire as a melange of contemporary and antique was the film's choice of music. Jay-Z served as the executive producer of the soundtrack for Great Gatsby, alongside Baz and music supervisor Anton Monstead. This decision was definitely part of the controversy upon the film's reception, but it's no accident. Jazz and hip-hop are both genres which emerged from Black American culture and were considered dangerous by the white establishment. But 100 years out, jazz as a genre is no longer the provocateur it once was. In fact, the genre has been so thoroughly ingrained, recontextualized, appropriated, that jazz is now seen as a classy, comfortable genre. So if your goal is to show 2013 audiences the way the Jazz Age felt, hip-hop becomes a natural surrogate. The film naturally walks the line of these modes, mixing contemporary jazz with modern hip-hop, switching between them and blending them to create an effect that is emotionally immersive and in line with many of the other creative choices of the film. The soundtrack also includes the film's theme, Young and Beautiful, by Lana Del Rey. A perfect time capsule of 2013, the song perfectly overlays with the film's Tumblr-tinged perversions of the 1920s aesthetic. There's more contemporary songs covered in an old style too, including a swing and soul cover of Beyoncé's 2003 song Crazy in Love, as well as a remix of a 2006 Gautier song. Gautier being famous at the time for his then viral hit, Somebody That I Used to Know. Baz himself touched on the mix of old and new in this quote from an interview in Stereo Gum, where he says, "While we acknowledge, as Fitzgerald phrased it, the Jazz Age, and this is the period represented on the screen, we, our audience, are living in the hip-hop age, and we want our viewers to feel the impact of modern-day music the way Fitzgerald did for the readers of his novel at the time of its publication." Okay, side note, have you guys ever seen the before and after VFX reel for this film? If you haven't, I highly recommend you to pause right now and go do it. But you'd better come back. I think the sense of artificiality really comes across when you watch the film, but it's hard to even imagine how much of this film is computer generated. And quick aside, that's CGI, not AI. They're different. There was no generative AI back then. Anyway, all the actors are living in a fake world. It's a wild mix of blue screens, green screens, and digital assets. It's about as computerized as Tron. I mean, seriously, I don't know why I thought they might have actually been standing on a dock here, or that this house may actually have existed, but sure, why not, right? It's a spectacle, it's a dream, that's the point, isn't it? The aesthetic is unconstrained by reality, just like the wealthy characters. VFX house Animalogic employed 175 artists working for over 18 months, making nearly 600 visual effects shots under the direction of Catherine Martin and VFX supervisor Chris Godfrey. They combined historical references with concept art to build out the fantastical CGI sets of The Great Gatsby. From Gatsby's lavish castle mansion to a futuristic Art Deco New York City skyline to the dust and dirt of the Valley of Ashes. It was even released in 3D, which I think is kind of goony and gimmicky. Like, they're gonna throw confetti at you, see flinch a little. It comes with the territory. I don't even have a comment on that. It's truly a sight to behold. I implore you to watch the VFX before and after reel. It further proves that nothing about this modernization of the 1920s was an accident. Baz wanted to take the Jazz Age to its logical conclusion, to exaggerate and heighten it beyond picture-perfect accuracy towards something more conceptual. Through the costumes, the music, and the VFX, we see not a mess of mistakes, but a web of intention, a tapestry of stylistic choices that don't paint a perfect picture of 1922 as it really was, but convey the danger, the sheen, the excitement of the Jazz Age to an audience that was desensitized by Instagram, twerking, and mainstream celebrity culture. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that I love the 2013 adaptation of Great Gatsby. It sort of kind of rocked my world. I'm coming out pretty hard to defend it, but this is not the only time the film has been adapted. The first adaptation, one could argue, is really the most historically accurate, as it was actually produced in 1926. Like most films from 1926, though, it exploded at some point, and nobody will ever watch it again. Pity. Critics and F. Scott Fitzgerald seem to think it was fine. It was adapted in 1949 too, focusing on the crime aspect of it, turning it into a film noir. This one seemed to get mixed reviews too, and like most movies from the 40s about the 20s, they did not try with the costumes. Longtime friend of F. Scott Fitzgerald, Edmund Wilson, hated this version. The 1974 version, nowadays, is often held up as a more accurate portrayal, being closer to the novel by virtue of it not being quite as over the top. But truthfully, this movie received quite scathing responses too from some critics at the time it came out. It was criticized as being slow, boring, and pretentious. Roger Ebert said, "This movie is faithful to what happens in the novel, that is, and not to the feel, mood, and spirit of it. Herein lies the crux of the clocking of the business that I'm standing on."
You're not getting it, it's not clocking.
F. Scott Fitzgerald himself can be quoted as saying in his 1931 essay, Echoes of the Jazz Age, "It was an age of miracles. It was an age of art. It was an age of excess. And it was an age of satire, the most expensive orgy in history." Reading that, one understands the 1920s were such a profound period of cultural change that really, to feel it, you just had to be there. But in an attempt to capture that je ne sais quoi requires a great deal of recontextualization. Baz Luhrmann delivers. The fact that it is so over the top makes it accurate in spite of itself. It's an epic, it's in your face, and it may not be historically accurate, but in a way, it's emotionally accurate. Eleanor Lanahan, the granddaughter of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Fitzgerald, is a writer and filmmaker herself. She came to the premiere of the film and watched intently. Afterwards, she came up to Baz Luhrmann and she told him she loved it. F. Scott would be proud, she said. The film gets its fair share of flack, but at the end of the day, I believe she's right. Speaking of movies, end of the 1920s, did you know silent film actors had to paint their faces weird colors to look normal on camera? I did a deep dive on this, and you guys loved it. So I made this poster just for you. Hand-painted, designed by myself, and available on my website right now. I wouldn't sell this poster if I didn't believe it was a dynamite piece of wall art for anyone interested in Art Deco aesthetics, the culture of filmmaking, and of course, classy retro design. So check out my website link in the description. Every purchase helps to support me in my dream of making content full-time. Thank you so much for building this wonderful community of film and fashion history lovers. We have so much fun here. Subscribe so you won't miss all the other ones I'm gonna make that will be just like this. I've been Swaffer, and I will see you on the flip side.